Today's guest on the Winning Teams podcast is Wanda Wallace. Now, Wanda is the managing partner of an organization called Leadership Forum. She has her own podcast, and she also has written the book, You Can't Know It All, Leading in the Age of Deep Expertise. And it's a really interesting conversation with somebody who has spanned academia and then set up her own business. So both the kind of academia and the entrepreneur, and bringing the best of both and sharing it with the work that she does with clients globally. She is based both in New York and in London, and that's because her business is truly international and works with very significant companies that you would know the names of. But when she's talking in the book, what she talks a lot about is the concept of, yes, being the expert, but also how you manage the span of control across other functions that you will lead, as she refers to them as the kind of expert and spanner, and really kind of digs into how you need to be both, and how you need to manage both, and how you need to behave when you're doing that to obviously optimize the impact of your own expertise, but also then leveraging the expertise of people within the team. And I think it's a fascinating conversation, because I think it's a challenge that leaders come across, all the time. Because we tend to get promoted from a position of expertise in whatever area, and then we have to become much more of a generalist. Although that's not a word that Wanda likes, and you'll hear share that. But it is the ability to actually lead across multi-functions and do that in an effective way. We also talk about the transition from the expert to being a spanner leader is being particularly difficult for women, and she's got a very interesting take on why that is. And I'm not going to spoil it by sharing that here, but I really would suggest for anyone to really listen to that, because I think it's really quite powerful. Because not only does she talk about it, but she also talks about what you can do about it to remedy that. So I really encourage you to listen to Wanda. She is a really interesting, fascinating, and articulate speaker. We would love to share the podcast with more people. So the ask I would have of you is to kind of give a review, share it with other people. That's how we get to a wider audience, and that's the whole purpose of it. But in the meantime, sit back and listen to the very, very interesting, very, very experienced and real leadership expert, Wanda Wallace. Wanda, thank you so much indeed for joining us today on the Winning Teams podcast. It's a great honor to have you.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Well, looking forward to this conversation. Just in terms of background, you're the managing partner of an organization called Leadership Forum. You've got a weekly radio and podcast, Out of the Comfort Zone, and you're the author of You Can't Know It All, Leading in the Age of Deep Expertise. Very briefly, what was your journey to actually become the managing partner, the podcast, the book? Just maybe give a bit of synopsis so people have context about you.
It is not a brief story, because like many careers, it has many twists and turns. And from where I started to where I am today, you wouldn't make a linear connection. But the short answer is I describe myself as a reformed academic, meaning I was a professor, assistant professor, in the marketing department at Duke University's Fuqua School of Business. And I got tired of academic life and decided there was a way to pursue the work that I loved outside of the academic world. And that led to founding a company, something I had never thought I would do. And here we are 20 plus years later.
So from academic to entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Quite the leap. I think it's maybe fair to say is that from reading your material, is that you're fascinated in how we view the world.
Yes.
I think what you say, if I quote you correctly, and I hope I am, is we make meaning out of everything, even with inaccurate data. And I was wondering, is that similar to the great Anne quote that, We don't see the world as it is. We see it as we are.
Yes, I think it's very much the same. And I think there's a lot of science coming out at the moment to reinforce that we are meaning-making machines. So we don't see everything. We don't see all the data. We can't process it all. It's way too much. We select pieces. Even our visual system selects pieces. And then we make a story out of that. We integrate it and have meaning and so on. And that is fundamentally what gets us in trouble with human relationships.
And if you take that, I mean, if you take that, and in the space that you operate in and that I work in as well, is in the whole leadership space.
Yep.
That's got significant impacts. I'm just curious as your take on that.
Huge impact. They're welcome to my world and my practice every single day. This is part of what the practice is. So let me give you my favorite story that I hear hundreds of times in any given week. I'm interacting with a colleague that I don't particularly love, and that colleague is threatened by me in some way. All right. Once you've made that conclusion, your options on how you behave are pretty limited. But that conclusion is based on some data, ignoring some other data, including the fact that that colleague's not threatened by a whole bunch of other people who have equal competence. So what is it about you? And it might not actually be threatened because that's your conclusion. All right. It could be a host of other things. And if you can unpack that and rewrite your interpretation, then you've got many more degrees of freedom of how to deal with that colleague. And by the way, often much more successful as a result.
So how do you catch yourself not, kind of saying, okay, that's what it is, so that's what it is? How do you catch yourself from doing that? Because that's human nature to a very large extent, isn't it? To do that. How do you stop yourself doing that and kind of unravel it somewhat?
Well, having someone else who will help you do this is very useful. So a peer, a friend, a coach is also very useful. But on your own, one of the things that I say is catch yourself making the judgment. The moment you say of somebody else, that person is, and fill in the blank, you have a judgment. Back away from the judgment and say, what are the behaviors? What are the actions that have led me to that conclusion? Not invalidating the conclusion, but I want you to go back to look at data. And then I want people to say, give me 3 plausible alternatives other than the one you've drawn. So just speculate. Give me 3. We don't know. We can't always know somebody's intention or their meaning or what they're seeing in the world without asking, but you give me 3 alternatives and I will bet you 90% of the time, your third one is closer to accurate than your first one. So it's just opening up that line of sight and entertaining different possibilities. Enormously helpful.
I think the other thing that I found really interesting, what you were saying, is that, you say that we can change the world by changing the quality of our conversations. And I always think it's very interesting because working with the team, to me, the comment I always make is that what I'm bringing is a framework for you to have a conversation. Right? I'm not bringing a solution. I'm not bringing an answer. I'm not bringing anything, but I'm bringing a framework for you to have the conversation. Can you maybe elaborate just somewhat on what you're saying there about, how we can change the world by changing the quality of the conversation?
Look, every decision everywhere ultimately rests on a conversation. Pick anyone, anywhere, and it's the conversation. It's the conversation with someone else's interpretation, somebody else's data facts, my interpretation, my data facts, and coming together with some reasonable alternative, compromise, collaboration, win-win strategy. But if that conversation is a really substantive quality conversation, we make better decisions and we have less stress at the end of the day. If I have a way of having a good conversation with you, even if it's on a difficult topic or a difficult message, I'm going to go home and not obsess about that conversation. I'm going to sleep better. I'm going to have better interactions with my family. I mean, the quality of my life is going to go up if I have better quality conversations day in and day out.
So if I would agree with you, I'm just saying, assuming that is true, which I agree with that it is true, how do we get better at having those quality conversations? Because so much that I observe, the conversations are what I would refer to as transactional conversations. but how do we get better? How do we develop the skill of having quality conversations?
Well, one, we have to do a better job in preparing ourselves for the conversation. You can't just turn up in that meeting, say whatever comes to your mind, and think that we're going to have a good conversation coming out of it. So more preparation on my message, on what I really mean to say, on what's my point of view, on what's my evidence to back that up, on my how I'm going to articulate that and deliver that message in the meeting. That is absolutely essential. And it's in that process that I back up and say, where are my biases? Where are my interpretations and conclusions? What alternative hypotheses do I need to look at? So there's a lot of prep I've got to do to be ready to have a quality conversation. The second thing, though, I swear the companies that get good at having conflict, meaning that substantive debate where it's difficult, we disagree, there's a lot at stake and emotions are running high. The companies and the teams that do that well will win in the marketplace at the end of the day. So we don't spend nearly enough time giving frameworks for how do you have those kind of really tough debates. We don't spend nearly enough time prepping the group of people to build the context and the relationships that will hold those conflict conversations. And we don't help people work through it. We just say, go have a conversation with them. Good luck. Oh, that didn't work. Oh, well, too bad. It takes work, but the outcome, I'd argue, is worth it.
Yeah. I mean, certainly one of the clear hallmarks of any high performing team is the ability to actually manage that conflict.
Absolutely.
And I think very often there's a misunderstanding that, and I say this all the time, is that it's wonderful to work in a high performing team, but it's not a happy clappy place, right? It's challenging because that is the nature of it. Can I bring you to your book that you published, You Can't Know It All, Leading in the Age of Deep Expertise? And we talk about that we are, and rightly so, we talk about the knowledge economy, but if I'm leading a large organization, then I can't be an expert at everything. So how do I manage both being the expert, and as you refer to, you might explain the term spanner, as you call it, because I actually thought you meant something different.
Yes.
But so how do we actually manage being both? And maybe explain the spanner concept as well.
All right. So spanner in the UK often is referenced to a screwdriver or a wrench or some other tool. And I don't mean to say spanner in that sense. I'm talking about spanning leadership, where I'm spanning across domains of knowledge. I'm responsible for those domains and decisions in those domains, but I don't have depth. Now, one of the things I want to say, that is not being a generalist. So a generalist would say, I have no content depth knowledge. I just know how to lead. And I think that is the biggest lie we've sold in all of our training of leadership, because you do have to have some knowledge. The question is, how much depth do you need? So when you're flipping constantly back and forth between an area where you do have an awful lot of depth, you can drill deep, 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 and actually do a lot of the work. You don't want to do that if you're leading the organization, because you want to let somebody else lead it, but you could if you need to. And areas where you don't have that depth. You have some knowledge, some understanding, but you're doing a breadth across those knowledge areas. And the flip between those two is extremely difficult. I often say it's like I'm playing soccer in the US or football outside the US with football cleats and football field, and I'm going to go inside and play basketball the next second with completely different kit and gear and rules and, team play. And that's what it feels like, flipping between those two. And I find leaders get stuck. They believe that the expertise is the comfort zone, and so they dig deep on everything and demotivate their team accordingly. Or they stay across the surface so broadly that they don't actually pick up in areas where they do need to drill down and then come back up. So the secret is being able to drill where you need to and then come right back up to the 50,000 foot level.
So what is the difference between the expert leader and the spanner leader?
Yeah. So an expert their value is going to be in the content knowledge that they bring to the discussion. So their teams are going to come to them and say, boss, how do I solve this particular technical problem? And the boss will be there to help them work through that technical problem. Teams love working for that kind of boss. It's exciting, it's fun, you're learning from them. And the boss is there largely to control quality and risk. So it's easy to go home at the end of the day and know what your value is. You know what you helped people do. You know what fires you solved, what problems you fixed. A spanning leader, though, value is very ambiguous because you're in a whole bunch of meetings. You're connecting the dots across a whole bunch of things. You hear something from one area and you bring it to your team to help them drill deep in their own way. And it's hard to know what your value is to the team. So you can ask good questions, yes, but you can't help them solve a technical problem. So you're finding your value in other ways, in the network, in your strategic skills, and your job is around priority and focus. Where are we really headed? What do we need to get right? What's our most urgent priority? Those are the ways in which you're really adding value to your team. So two very different things.
Sorry, go on.
And it goes on from there. I mean, the work I'm doing is dramatically different. As an expert leader, I'm doing the same work my team is doing.
Yeah.
I could do every job on the team. As a spanning leader, I can't do that. I can't do any of it. My work is different.
So if you're say, for example, I'm kind of the leader in question and my expertise is in marketing, right? But we've got multi-functions. And the risk for the people in the team is that those that are marketing are close to it see me as the expert, right? And can identify me as the expert. But those that are in other areas can actually see, well, maybe he's being promoted beyond his competence and he doesn't really have a clue about these areas, which actually may be true. But how do you manage that you're not seen as being kind of, okay, well, there's deep expertise there, but a lightweight over here?
Yeah. Well, and that's what the team is going to say. I mean, that's going to be the first 6 months of their conversation. Why was that guy or woman put in this place? What the heck do they know? And how disrespectful is that of my expertise? Because they know nothing about my expertise. Or if I'm in the marketing function, I'm going to be saying, is that person ever going to get out of the way so I can elevate myself? So there's a risk on both sides. And the secret is knowing what the role demands of you. So the trick is, if I take over this broad area and I am the expert in marketing, I tend to stick too closely to the marketing and I don't elevate myself up enough and let the team underneath me perform. Or if I'm in the spanning space, let's say now I'm looking at technology, for example, and I try to drill deeply and become suddenly the expert, and I offend the technologists that are already there. So the question is, where do you have expertise on the team existing outside from you? And what's the value you now are adding? And you'll frequently find for the technologist, what they need is understanding how to integrate what they do into the broader mission of the group. They need the interface between marketing and, by the way, some other areas. That's what your job is. If you don't have technical expertise in technology, then you need to find it, because you can't become that expert. That's a mistake. It's not the right use of your time. So the watchword people always hear is leverage. When it's time for you to be in a spanning role, then you're going to be hearing, I want you to create leverage. I'm looking for you to do more out of your team than you can do by yourself. And that's a signal that you need to elevate out of the details. Let somebody else do the details, and you know enough of the detail structure, but not the depth. Does that make sense, John?
Yes, it does. No, absolutely. No, I get that. And I suppose I'm just thinking about leaders in that environment is when do they lean into their expertise and when do they lean into the spanning?
Right. And it's not because of what's comfortable to you, just for the record, because I see an awful lot of people who get value out of being able to fight that fire. And so they jump in every time to be the hero. And all they're doing is dragging themselves back into the details that they should let somebody else be handling. So you got to resist that temptation. And when you have expertise on the team that's reporting to you in a technical area, it is time to let them be the expert. And you step above that to do the spanning responsibilities for their area of expertise. When you don't have expertise, either you have to fill it, like somebody leaves and you have to step into that role for a temporary period of time, or you have to go and find it. because somebody's got to do the details. We can't just ignore them. It just doesn't need to be you every day.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting when you were saying that, transitioning. So let me go back to one point, because very often the expert gets promoted to become the leader because they have an expertise in the subject matter, but that doesn't necessarily follow they're going to be a good leader of other experts, and you end up losing an expertise and getting a poor manager.
Yep. Yeah.
How do you identify within the expert, how is that person going to transition to a leadership role?
See, I think a lot of experts, contrary to popular opinion, could become better leaders if we explain to them that the job changes. So in financial services terms, what we're asking people to do is be a player coach. And we don't talk about what you do when you're being the player, the worker, the doer, the, technical person, versus being the coach or the leader or stepping out of the technical details. And the book is about how do I switch between those two. I think if we gave better expert leaders understanding of why they need to step out of the expertise area and what it means to do and skills in doing that, we'd have a lot better managers in a lot of better places.
Yeah. Interesting. Go back to the point I was just about to make there, and the question I was about to ask you was that you do say that transitioning from expert to spanner leaders is particularly difficult for women.
Yes.
And I'm just curious as to why you say that. I mean, I fully accept that, the corporate world, while, some progress has been made, but it is still essentially a boys' club, right? But I'm just curious as to why transitioning from the expert to spanner leader is particularly difficult for women.
Okay. It's particularly difficult for women and other minorities, by the way. And you can define minority any way you want. So I'll take the case of women. Most women who come into the corporate world were top students at university. Most, not everybody, of course. And they succeeded at university because they would drill down, they'd work extra hard, they do the work themselves. Okay. Get really good grades, you get rewarded for that. You come in early in your career, you are doing the work yourself. That extra attention to detail, that extra willingness to drill a little deeper, the doing it yourself efficiently is going to get you noticed and promoted. That's all really well. And it will make you a great leader as an expert leader, because you will be busy training the team to pay attention to the details, get it right, accuracy, perfection, and so on. That's great. Now, if I am your manager, I'm going to love that because you're taking care of that area and I don't have to worry about it. So great. I have little vested interest in actually helping you elevate yourself or move across because you're making my life easy. Now, the next step, though, past being that expert leader, is going to require you to step out of your expertise, at least in part, and add an area over which you are not the expert. And if I watch you now struggle not making that transition, I don't want to do that to you because I'm taking a really great performer and undermining her. That's one side of it. The other side of it, though, is for women and other minorities, it's convenient to rely on my expertise. So I get great reviews for doing this. I get really good promotion. Really good accolades. That's great. My network is built around people who use my expertise. And I don't have to go out and build that broad-based network, which many women and minorities don't enjoy doing. And more importantly, my work is speaking for itself. It gets me a little aside of the politics. It gets me a little aside of the big strategic, what's the urgency? And my work is speaking for myself. I build a reputation around that. And that is comfortable when you're a minority, because I don't have to break into the quote club, as you describe. Or I like to say into the dominant coalition, whatever that is. Okay. So both sides then have a vested interest in keeping it the same until she gets to the point where she's saying, why am I not getting that next level promotion? And you're not, because you haven't sold yourself yet as somebody who can step outside your expertise, nor has the organization seen you as somebody who can step outside your expertise.
So the shortcoming, if I interpret what you're saying, is the shortcoming falls on both sides.
Absolutely, totally.
Right. So if you take if you're the woman or the minority, how do you talk yourself out of actually staying and in that safe place?
Right.
Because if I stay in that safe place, well, I'm not going to change anything, right? And at least that's the bit that I'm in control of
Right.
myself.
Right.
So what do I need to do to shift that limiting paradigm of my own?
Right. So there's nothing wrong with staying in that safe place. If you are really dedicated to the risk
Yeah.
function and you want to be in the risk function for the rest of your life and you're happy with that choice, then stay there. Great. If you are seeking, though, the higher level roles with the strategic accountability, a seat at the table, if you will, then you're going to have to get comfortable with stepping away from your zone of expertise. So it's a call, but it's an understanding that there are consequences for that call on both sides. I'm giving up something and I'm potentially gaining something. So choice. All right. I'm a believer in choices. Recognizing your choices is what I'm all about. All right. Now, if I decide that I am looking for showing the company that I can do a broader role, then I need ways of demonstrating that and calling attention to it without leaving my day job, because I don't want to leave my safety net, abandon it, and suddenly take a job in marketing. That is not what we're talking about. A gradual transition. The simplest way of doing that is to do some volunteer work. So on a project that you might be a member of or lead even, that is outside your zone of expertise, that gives you breadth of exposure. A charitable event, organize it, be seen as the leader of it. A women's event, a minority event. I mean, there's a client event. There are tons of things to do that are small examples to show you can lead outside of your zone of expertise. And then talk to people about it. I'm ready to take that next step, you might say. And I'd like the experience of being able to lead a group that I'm not the expert on. Help me find a project where I can demonstrate that. Help me find an opportunity to test how good I am at it. I think if you start using that language, you're going to find that people are much more open to giving you opportunities.
That's great advice for anybody listening who falls into that category, and things that they can actually do and control and influence themselves. To anybody listening from a broader perspective, to what we're talking about being the expert in the span of control, what tips can you give listeners right now? Say, okay, well, I've heard this, that actually makes sense. I can identify with that, that I'm not quite doing this right. What some tips can you share right now they can do something with?
All right. The number one thing you've got to do is get your head straight on what's the value that you're adding in each role. And test that out with your boss, with your mentors, with other people, and make sure you're thinking solidly about your unique contribution to the team. What is it you're really doing in leading this group? Number two question that comes up is, how do I delegate? Because now I've got to get other people to do stuff and accountability, and they don't do it the way I wanted, and it's not as perfect, and there are errors and all the problems we deal with all day long. And that advice is about learning to think about delegating differently. So we do delegating as if it were a ditch and dessert. Here, it's yours. Go figure it out. Good luck. I hope it's going to be okay. And that just doesn't work. You've got to go into a coaching mode where you're getting people to ask questions, and you're asking questions. You're getting people to articulate what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, by when. If you change your style, you're going to have a much better success at getting people to do things, and they'll be happier. The third thing, though, is that your relationships now have to change. So when we come back to conflict, when we typically think about conflict, that we want to look at the facts. That's what an expert leader does. Where's my facts? And we'll argue about your facts and my facts. When you're in this spanning space, you now have to lean into the emotions that are present. What's at stake for that other person? Why is that troubling for them? Where are they likely to be able to compromise? How much listening do I do to bring down the tension? There's a whole other range of skills besides just focusing on the facts or the rational argument. It's only going to get you so far. So it's broadening that space of how you interact with people. I could go on. The book is filled with examples and exercises and the details of each of these transitions back and forth.
Well, it's certainly well worth reading, anybody listening in. Wanda, this has been fantastic. Before I ask you where people can get in touch with you, where they can get the book, etc., which would put everything in the notes, but if they're listening right now, two questions. One, a book other than your own that's had an impact upon you. What's the book and what was the impact?
There are many. I mean, I
can
read
imagine.
many books in my own podcast, but the one that I am still talking about right, left, and center is Cassie Holmes' Happier Hour. And it's a lovely data point of how much time do I need every day to be at that, to do what I love doing, to put me at my happiest self.
Oh, I haven't come across that. It's Happier Hour. What's the author?
Happier. Cassie Holmes, Holmes.
Oh, I love getting a new one.
Brilliant research. Brilliant research. And there's a brand new one coming out too. Rob Cross and Karen Dillon, Micro Stress Effect. Also really good.
Okay, excellent. Daily rituals, do you have them? If you do, what are they and how do they actually support your day?
Okay, daily rituals. I have a couple, but the one I'm going to confess to, at least publicly for my daily ritual, has to do with reading articles just for fun. One of the things that I've learned in the last 2 years, following the stress data and my own stress and recovery, is that when I have time to read an article just for the curiosity of reading it, I get that lovely recovery thing that we always talk about, the release of stress. So I try to do that at least one point in absolutely every day, and usually first thing in the morning.
Very good. Other rituals that you have?
Yeah, I play some word game first thing in the morning as a way of waking up my brain. So that's my routine.
Keep the brain active.
Yes.
Keep the brain active. That's great. Wanda, thank you so much indeed for joining us here today. Where can people get in touch with you and where can they get the book?
Okay, I'm on every social media thing I think you might like to follow. So on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, and increasingly on TikTok. So Wanda, middle initial T, Wallace will find us. The book is on pretty much every seller that you would expect. If you go to our website, leadership-forum.com, you'll find a link to all of those and ways to connect with me.
Fantastic. Wanda, thank you so much indeed. It's been a real pleasure. Fascinating. I love the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.